You are Locked On Clippers Postcast, part of Locked On Los Angeles on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome, Clippers fans, to the Clippers Postcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for joining us here. You can find us, of course, on the Locked On Sports LA YouTube channel under live, and you can listen to us on the Locked On Clippers podcast feed. I am Pete Fox, been covering sports in LA for ESPN Radio and NBC Sports Radio since 2007. And tonight was the first test for this Clipper team in quite a while. I was coming into this going to say that sometimes you're the bug and sometimes you're the windshield. And by the end of the game, the Clippers had made it interesting. So let's get into the details. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place just a $5 bet. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Yes, this Clipper T-Wolves game was a test in Minnesota, Target Center. Let's set the stage a little bit because we know that the Minnesota Timberwolves, if you're a fan of the NBA, are the number one team in the West. Coming in, they have the best defense in the league. Their defensive rating is 108.3, and the Clippers isn't far off. It's not terrible. They're number 12 in the league, defensively speaking, 113.6. The Timberwolves allowed under 44% for their opponent's shooting. Offensively speaking, the Clippers are number 5 in the league with 119.2 as their offensive rating, and the Timberwolves are number 20 in the league at 113.9. So we thought the Clippers were going to have to really fill it up as they've been doing lately to kind of get past and deal with the T-Wolves defense. And at first, they weren't doing that. Not at all. They played fairly poorly in the first quarter. Second quarter, they got it going a little bit. By the third quarter, Minnesota had taken charge again. The third quarter was abysmal. That was one, if you had anything better to do at all, you're like, well, I'm out. Can't win them all. And then by the fourth quarter, the Clippers got it rolling again. They kept battling. It was this kind of gritty, determined, gutty performance that by the fourth quarter, they made it interesting. They outscored the Minnesota Timberwolves 37-28. When we get to our bucket list here in the second segment, we'll break it down a little bit more specifically. But down the stretch, big buckets from Powell, James Harden. Harden had some free throws that were huge. Russell Westbrook hit a 3 in the final seconds. They kept fouling Rudy Gobert, who's terrible at the free throw line. But that being said, he did hit clutch free throws down the stretch when it mattered. The Clippers were on a 20-7 run there in the fourth quarter, which made it interesting. They got it below double digits into a single digit deficit. And by the end, it was a 3-point game in the final minute. Fouling back and forth. Russell Westbrook after a James Harden steal, or was it a Kawhi Leonard steal? I think it was a Kawhi Leonard steal late in the game. Harden had a look, which obviously would have only been 3 points, which would have gotten them to within 1. But it came up short, and the Timberwolves win it 109-105 and are now 15-2 at home. This just the fourth loss for the Clippers since December 1st, and the second loss of the season for the Clippers with I shouldn't say the season of the second season for the Clippers since December 1st. Second loss with Kawhi Leonard on the floor. The thing that was good about this game for me was I've talked about the first quarter intensity for the Clippers being kind of lackluster. They kind of feel out their opponent, and nothing is too ramped up, nothing's too ratcheted up. They're just taking it easy in the first quarter. Tonight, it felt different. The intensity coming out of the gate for the Clippers was just a little bit higher, and rightfully so. I mean, this T-Wolves team is for real, and I'm not super familiar with them. Obviously, they are the real deal, but you could tell that the T-Wolves could feel the intensity a little bit too. They were a little sloppy in the first half of the first quarter, but then went on a 14-2 run and made it a comfortable lead for them. They started to pull away, and the Clippers were just struggling. I think the defense that the Minnesota Timberwolves presented caused the Clippers a lot of problem. Now, all that being said, they were without Ivica Zubac tonight. And I know some people might think, well, so what? They've got two other big men in Plumlee and Daniel Tice. But I feel like Zubac, it's a different game if Zubac is playing. They might still lose, but it is a very, very different game because Ivica Zubac, aside from the last game out in Memphis where they dominated and he didn't feel the need, I guess, to be that productive. He had a bad night a couple nights ago in Memphis, but prior to that, during this run for them, at least back to the first of the year, Ivica Zubac has been a crucial figure offensively and defensively. Something else that popped into my mind as this game started, I was thinking, all right, this is a real test for them, the Clippers. And let's look back at their schedule since the first of the year and see how many of those opponents we feel are, they do this in baseball all the time. Okay, yeah, so what? You've won 8 in a row. Big deal. Who have you played? Well, let's look at who the Clippers have played over that stretch of time back to the first of the year. Of course, they beat the Grizz a couple of nights ago. Then an interesting back and forth battle with the Toronto Raptors that they won. They beat Phoenix. Now, Phoenix is a good team, so that's a real win for me. They lost to the Lakers. But that's one of those throw the records out the window kind of a thing. It was an ugly, muddy, sloppy rock fight of a game. So I think they came away from that game learning some stuff about themselves because they played great against Toronto and Phoenix right after that. But they beat New Orleans handily. New Orleans is a good team. That was in the Big Easy. They beat Phoenix right before that and Miami to start the year. So I look at that stretch of teams right there, and I think it's not a bunch of pushovers. It's not like they're playing Detroit every night. So those are some real wins there. The Grizz are not good, but they had won 4 of 5 coming into that game a couple of nights ago. So the Clippers have obviously been playing well, but they've been doing it against tough opponents. So the T-Wolves coming in, no joke, 2 losses at home, first in the West. Karl Anthony Towns is a perennial all-star. Anthony Edwards, here's a guy that I did not know much about. Heard the name, of course, loved him on ER, but more than anything, wasn't really familiar with him. Liked him probably a little bit more in Top Gun than I did in ER. Okay, enough of the actor jokes. But nonetheless, the basketball player, drafted in 2020 as the number 1 overall pick, I'd heard the name, have not seen a lot of him on the floor. And he's fantastic. Plays with a ton of energy, fills it up, and is just gritty. So there's a lot to like about this guy. One of the big reasons that this Timberwolves team is playing well right now. He played 38 minutes, was 10 of 16, a couple of threes, 11 of 12 for the line, leading all with 33 points. So he is the real deal. And of course, Mike Conley, he's been busting up the Clippers for a long time. So those guys, among others, Anderson, 27 minutes, had 10 points. McDaniels had some big threes, a couple of them for 14 points. Rudy Gobert finished the night with 15, and Karl Anthony Towns, 7 of 12 for 17 points. So at the end of the first half, it was a ball game. It was a 1-point ball game. Clippers down by 1 at the break. We'll come back after this break and talk about the bucket list, the big buckets of the night for the Clippers, and break down the second half. All right, let's get to FanDuel. FanDuel, it's that time of year, the NFL playoffs. If you're not a big wagerer, you're not big into sports betting, this is the time of year when you kind of rip the Band-Aid off and say, hey, I think I'm going to play some wagers because for whatever reason, the NFL draws more people to making bets. So right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with FanDuel. It's guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like same game parlays. You can go to the parlay hub and pick from a variety of different parlays. And those, of course, have a larger multiplier, so you can win more with those parlays. You can find all sorts of bets in the new Explore tab, so that helps you kind of navigate around the app, and of course, a lot more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right. Clippers fall in Minnesota to the first place Timberwolves 109-105. They made it interesting coming down the stretch. They started battling. They started making buckets. It was almost the thing that happens to them frequently when they get out to a big lead. They let down a little bit. So I wasn't terribly surprised, but I did appreciate the adversity that they faced. It's good for this team. They can't just beat everybody by 10. You know, when you have a tough opponent and you lose, these are the kind of things that help you grow as a team. So I feel like the most important part of this game was the fourth quarter when they battled back. They were down, I believe 18 was the largest deficit. I know it was 13 pretty frequently there in the fourth quarter. But at the 7:32 mark of the fourth quarter, Paul George hit a three. And this coming from Paul George, who came off a performance with 37 points a couple of nights ago. Tonight, he could not find the bottom of the net. Not his best performance. 9 of 19 when it was all said and done for 26. I'm sorry, that's Kawhi's line. Paul George was 5 of 19 for 16, but he had 4 threes, and they were meaningful late in the game. Norman Powell had a three at the 4:27 mark to make it a 10-point game after the T-Wolves battled back. Then Harden hit a couple of free throws at the 3:32 mark. That made it an 8-point game. Clippers rallying. Then Harden right after that made a three at the 2-minute mark to make it a 6-point game. It was 103-97 at that point. This is part of that 20-7 run for the Clippers late in the fourth. And Norman Powell, who went off of the bench, had a three at the 109 mark to make it a 3-point ball game. But this is when they started the hack a Gobert, fouling Rudy Gobert, hoping that he would miss, because early in the night, he was like 1 of 7 from the line, and he was missing the entire basket. And then, you know, the Clippers are on the sidelines laughing, and Rudy Gobert is even laughing at himself. It was so bad. What was he from the line? 7 of 14. But here's the big news about that for the T-Wolves. He made him when he needed to. It wasn't like he was missing him late in the game. So when the Clippers were fouling him with that old technique, you know, hack a Shaq is what it was originally called. When they were doing that to Rudy Gobert, he was making the buckets for them. The Clippers kept rallying, though, and got it to within 4, but that would be the end of it. 109-105, the final. There was also a big bucket for Daniel Tice in the first quarter, as it was a 3, and it was the first bucket of the game. I was like, with Zubac out and Daniel Tice starting the game, he found out allegedly like a couple of minutes before the game started that he was going to play. Zubac's dealing with a tight calf. So Daniel Tice got the start. His first look at the 11-11 mark, he banged down a 3 to give the Clippers a 3-0 lead. Then at the 4:41 mark, Harden hit a little layup to make it 16-8. And the reason that was important, their Clippers are still down, but it stopped a 14-2 run that we discussed. So it was a layup. I'm sorry, it was a free throw. That's what the FT on my notes stands for, not a 1-footer. It was a free throw for James Harden that stopped that 14-2 run. Then Kawhi had a couple of buckets right around the 3:30 mark back to back to make it 21-12. That stopped that run for the T-Wolves that continued. It was a 19-3 run at that point before Kawhi made those 2 buckets. Then on to the second quarter, Norman Powell had a big 3 at the 7:07 mark to make it again under a double-digit deficit. 37-29 T-Wolves at that point. Then Harden, a bucket and a foul. Harden played pretty well, but it was very inefficient. He did not shoot well from the floor all in all, but had a decent night with 14 points. He was 4 of 14 from the free throw line. He was 4 of 5 though, and a couple of threes. So he had a foul and the and one there at the 6:46 mark to make it a 5-point game. Then Paul George had a basket at the 6:01 mark. Wasn't all that meaningful, but it was his first basket of the night. So he went midway through the second without scoring. At that point, it was a 2-point game. Clippers down 2 there. So they were rallying a little bit, and they needed that basket from Paul George. Kawhi had a 3 at the 5:02 mark to make it a 1-point game. This was part of a 12-0 run for the Clippers. And then at the 1:33 mark of the second quarter, Kawhi had a 3 to tie the game at 41. Then some big baskets right in the final seconds of the first half. Russell Westbrook, a driving layup and the foul at the 1:03 mark That put the Clippers down 1 again, because through all of this, the Timberwolves did not go away. They kept scoring and kept hanging in there, because that was probably their most inefficient quarter of the game, scoring just 17 points, but they did not allow the Clippers to run away because their defense is so tight. Norman Powell had a dunk to give the Clippers a lead. This was at the 37-second mark of the second quarter. It was 45-44 at that point. The T-Bulls would score right after that and regain the lead. So at the break, 46-45, T-Wolves on top. Then in the third quarter, there was not a lot going on. The T-Wolves were just pulling away. They had 35 points in that quarter, and the Clippers really struggled. But Paul George did have a 3 at the 7:32 mark to bring it within 9. Correction, that's the start of the fourth quarter. At the third quarter, Harden had the 3 at the 7:55 mark to make it a 7-point game. And then Kawhi with a big steal, a layup at the 6:59 mark. So those 2 big buckets, 5 in a row for the Clippers, came back to back to make it a 5-point game. It was 61-56 T-Wolves at that point. So the Clippers were just hanging around, and Kawhi Leonard, a big part of that. He was good tonight, not great, not the kind of brilliance that we've seen from him of late. 9 of 19 from the floor. Perfect from the line, 2 of 3 from beyond the arc for 26 points. He was the reason that this game was not a bigger, ugly blowout, as well as Russell Westbrook. Another interesting, energetic performance off the bench for Russell Westbrook, and we'll get to that right after this. All right, let's talk about Gametime. Gametime. This is your app where you can go and buy tickets to concerts, games, theater, all sorts of things. And one of the cool things about the Gametime app is they have great last minute deals. I don't know about you, but I do enjoy this sort of pulling one out of your backside. Hey, let's go to a game, like last minute. What should we do tonight? It's a Friday, nothing going on, no plans on the calendar. Let's go to a game. Well, get the Gametime app. They have last minute deals, all in prices, views from the seats. So, even though you're buying it last minute, you're not going to be stuck in the worst seat in the house unless you're okay with that. And sometimes you are when it's last minute and you want to go and just have a good time. You don't really care where you sit. Check out the Gametime app. It's fast and easy. It's a great way to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. Views, again, from all the seats in the venue. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. I bet you get even better deals then. Check out tickets for the Clippers and Thunder a couple of nights from tonight. So that's Tuesday night, starting from $11. No joke. There was a bunch of them from $11. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. It is very easy to use and it is very worthwhile when it comes to saving money on last minute tickets with the lowest prices guaranteed. All right, Clippers, their 14th loss of the season, just their 4th defeat since December 1st, falling in Minnesota to the Timberwolves, a measuring stick sort of game where they saw what the top of the West has to offer. And when it comes to defense, this team is no joke. They frustrated the Clippers left, right, and center. The defense in the fourth quarter was absolutely stifling early on in the fourth quarter. As I said, the third quarter for the Clippers was abysmal. They slowed down the Clippers in transition, which is something they've been doing very well lately, and Ty Lue has been relying on that. Speaking of Ty Lue, I've talked about it a couple of times recently where I question myself as to whether or not I'm talking about Ty Lue doing his job. Am I even mentioning Ty Lue enough? Because I don't mention him a lot. Tonight, we could see him up off the bench yelling at the officials. Brian Seaman at one point said Ty Lue is livid. Then they showed a picture of him and he looked a little disturbed. I don't know that he was livid, but he was ticked off and yelling at the referee. So I think Ty Lue broke a sweat tonight a little bit more than Paul George did, yelling at the refs, yelling at his team, trying to get them back into the game. And when it was all said and done, he did. They made it interesting. This game would have been a different game, I think, if Zubats was playing. Again, they might have still lost, but nonetheless, it would have been different because I think Zoo would have taken up some space down there in the paint and scored a few buckets that were missed. Mason Plumlee, though, in 16 minutes was 4 of 5, so he filled in very nicely with 8 points. And Daniel Tice, who started, played 22 minutes, had 1 bucket, that 3 that I mentioned at the 11-11 mark of the first quarter. So let's say Tice doesn't play as much and Plumlee does, and Zoo gets 6 or 8. Again, it's a different ball game. But, woulda, coulda. Tonight, the Clippers were the windshield or the bug. Which one's worse? I can't remember. The bug is worse. You don't want to be the bug. You want to be the windshield. That's right. Let's get to superlatives here on this one. It was a little tougher. The superlatives are easy when the Clippers win. When they lose, you're like, I'm going to find somebody to congratulate in this loss. But it did make it a little bit more interesting down the stretch. So my 3 superlatives tonight are best dancer. This was Russell Westbrook. Tonight, he was working overtime more than he normally does with the energy. How many steals? I felt like he had a bunch of steals. He had a grand total of 2 steals. It felt like 22 because he was working so hard when the Clippers were down with energy, running, dancing, moving, just doing all sorts of stuff. He was 3 of 8 from the floor. He had 13 assists, though. So that I loved. He was dancing all over the place to find the open man. He had just 12 points, which is a good night, and 2 threes. Perfect from beyond the arc, including a big one late that was helpful to the Clippers to kind of keep the rally going in the final seconds. But it just wasn't enough. He did have an opportunity to make it a 1-point ball game, but I still think they would have come up short. He was 4 of 5 from the line and had 8 rebounds. So a really good performance, dancing all over the floor, doing everything that needed to be done for the Clippers to try to keep them in this game and get them back to give them an opportunity to get back in this game and win it. Russell Westbrook, the best dancer of the night. As far as the most creative game, Kawhi Leonard, he was also super energetic, trying everything he could, including whining to the referees, which was very strange for Kawhi Leonard. We don't see that sort of thing from Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard doesn't talk to other people, teammates, let alone referees. Ty Lue was doing most of the talking, but Kawhi Leonard was also talking. He felt like he was getting fouled all night long, at least in the first half. In the second half, when they started to get it going in the fourth quarter, he kind of piped down and just started playing his game. But he was working overtime. You could just see the determination in his eyes that he was not going to let the Clippers lose this game ugly. And he was going to do everything in his power to give them an opportunity to win. And I think he did that. He was a big part of the reason this game wasn't a blowout. 26 points in 37 minutes, going 9 of 19, 2 of 3 from beyond the arc. He had a couple of steals as well. So we always like to see that. And lastly, the best entertainer of the night was Norman Powell, i.e. the best player of the night. Norman Powell was red hot in 30 minutes, 9 of 12, going 6 of 9 from beyond the arc. He had 6 threes, including some big ones at big moments for the Clippers throughout this game. He finished with 24 off the bench. So he was clutch. He was definitely the most entertaining of the players, just from the standpoint that you felt most confident when he shot the ball at the basket. When the ball was leaving his hand, you felt pretty good that it was going to go in. So best entertainer of the night, Norman Powell, in spite of a loss for the Clippers, 109-105. They are off tomorrow, and then they play the Thunder in LA on Tuesday, which will be another test. To me, it feels of the ilk of Phoenix, New Orleans, Toronto. It's that kind of game for them. So they're going to have to come out and be ready to play, although they're going to have that smell in the barn issue lingering in the back of their head, because after Tuesday, they're off till Sunday. And that's like the end of a road trip kind of a thing. I don't this is a wagering logic. When a team is at the end of a road trip and heading home, They just phone it in because they're like smelling the barn. Now, I've said this term smelling the barn to a lot of people, and they go, what does that mean? Smelling the barn. So I'm assuming that you people as well, there's going to be a few of you that don't know what that is. So I'll explain. When you take a horse on a ride, right, whether it's a trail ride or you're out, rounding up the herd like on Yellowstone, at the end of that ride, the horse starts sprinting back towards the barn, i.e. smelling the barn. They can see it, they can feel it, whatever, and they know their ride's about over and they get to have some hay or an oat bag. So they start sprinting back towards the barn. And you as the rider, when you're like me and you're not an experienced rider, you have a tough time controlling the horse. So that's what happens to a lot of NBA teams at the end of a road trip. They have a lot of tough time controlling the fact that they know they're going to be off or back home for a few days. So I think the Clippers are going to have to guard against that, the letdown that they're off till Sunday. So we'll see how that goes. But I do think playing this game against the Timberwolves in Minnesota and losing will be a motivating factor for them, that they now know, what is out there and what the best defensive team in the league brings to the game, brings to the floor. So they have a measuring stick, if you will. And I think they're going to be able to ratchet it up. And their defense wasn't terrible. It wasn't great because the Timberwolves were just not missing. As I've mentioned before, in the words of Doc Rivers, the NBA is a make-miss league. When you make buckets, you win. When you don't, you lose. And when this game was all said and done, the Clippers got it back to a respectable number at 43.4%. How interesting is that? The Timberwolves do not allow a team to shoot on average over 44%. They held the Clippers to 43.4. That's amazing. But they shot 56%. So if you want to boil it down to one thing, the reason the Clippers lost this game was because the T-Wolves shot better and played better defense. So there you go. All in all, though, it turned out to be an exciting game down the stretch in spite of a 109-105 loss. Once again, I'm Pete Fox. Thank you for joining me here on the Locked On Clippers postcast, and thank you for watching us on the Locked On Sports LA YouTube channel. Please be sure to become a subscriber to the Locked On Sports LA YouTube channel. That way you'll get notifications as to when we're getting ready for the postcasts. And you can also listen to us on the Locked On Clippers podcast feed. Have a good night. We will talk again on Tuesday.
You are Locked On Clippers postcast, part of Locked On Los Angeles on the Locked On Podcast Network, your